Yeah.
Yes, a very good morning to all of you.
Thank
And
you.
it
Same
is
to you.
15th August, the Indian Independence Day today.
Yeah.
So we are broadcasting from Kolkata
Yeah.
on the morning of 15th August at 9:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time. With me here is Professor Ketaki Dotto, my old friend and fellow editor of Poetry Central, a small initiative of ours in Kolkata. And we are delighted to welcome in our midst the prolific poet and writer Magdalena Ball to the second session of the Speaking Muse run by Poetry Central. Uh, I would just like to offer a very brief introduction of Miss Ball. She is one of the leading voices in Australian American poetry in English, a poet, novelist, writer, and critic living in rural New South Wales, Australia. She runs the reputed review site and journal Compulsive Reader. Originally from New York City, where she grew up and gained her honors degree in English literature, she did her post-graduation from Oxford, UK, and eventually migrated to Australia. She has authored the poetry books Unreliable Narratives, High Wire Step, Unmaking Atoms, Repulsion Thrust, and Quark Soup. Apart from various other writings, the novels Black Cow and Sleep Before Evening, and several other works. She has also won numerous prizes for her work. So, welcome, Miss Ball, to our session. We are delighted to have you here with us. And I think I would like to initiate the session by inviting Ketaki to start the dialogue by asking Miss Ball a few questions. So,
Thank you.
Ketaki, yes, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bose, Dr. Indrajit Bose. And it's really, really a thrilling moment for me. It's a moment filled with thrill. And I feel that uh, I do not know what should I say. That Magdalena Ball, with whom I had many dialogues on emails regarding my reviews, is sitting in front of me, ready to read from her poems. I'm really very thrilled. I'm so thrilled. Thank you, Magdalena Ball, for accepting our invitation. And now I'm coming straight to the questions. First is, you are writing since last 20 years, I believe. Could you please tell us about your journey through this uh, primrose path of poetry? You can talk about your journey, and we are avid to listen to you. Please.
Thank you, Ketaki, and also thank you, Indrajit, for the beautiful introduction. I don't think you can actually tell on the video that I'm blushing from all your kind words. And I wish I was not virtually, but literally sitting across from you. But nevertheless, I'm very happy to be here. So thank you very much for inviting me and having me today. The Primrose Path. Words you have. Okay, I think I'm not different from many people in this, that writing has always been for me just another part of reading. It always came. Well, I was a reader first. I've always been a reader. I'm probably more a reader than a writer, but from when I was very little, just a very small child, maybe even a baby, probably a baby. My mother would read me stories. My father would read me stories, bedtime stories. That's how it is for most people, and for me, those were the best moments of my life. Really, just to sit there and in that closeness, in that moment of feeling completely safe, and immersing myself in the actual joy of language and the stories and the pictures. And as a mother, I enjoyed reading to my children as well. And I really think that that's the origin of my love of words, which is really the origin of writing, is to be able to take, things that are hard to say, things that are difficult to say, things that you might experience or you might perceive or you might struggle with, and to try and work through those sensations into something that is concrete and put down and able to be shared with somebody else. It's a bridge, it's a connection, it's an absolute joy. So I really think I'll use the term again because I like it, the primrose path to becoming a writer is really, it just begins with the sheer and kind of unabashed, naive pleasure of enjoying somebody else's words. And from that, you want to make your own. You want to also create and produce something that is also, meaningful to people and that can give that joy. And you can share ideas that way too.
Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. I want to ask you that when you are expressing yourself in each and every line of your poems, do you feel that you are expressing your personality or you are having an escape from your personality? I remember T.S. Eliot once said that poetry is not turning loose the emotions, but an escape from emotions. It is not an expression of personality, but an escape from personality. But for that, one should have both. That is both personality and emotions. Otherwise, they cannot escape from those two. So, what is your take on it? It's a humble question.
Look, I would not like to be prescriptive about what poetry should or shouldn't do because I'm still delighted by coming across new ways of expressing that people express things. So, there are all sorts of different ways in which different people approach how they use language. And poetry in particular, I think, seems to me to be a very open form that can be very personal, it can be very objective, it can, it can take all sorts of forms. Even like Amanda Gorman's recitation at the U.S. inauguration, it can be a speechify type thing, or it can be very very personal and quiet. The sort of Emily Dickinson never leave the house type poetry, which is still nevertheless incredibly powerful and classic today. So there's all sorts of ways in which poetry can work. For me, I think it's a little of both. I mean, we always start with the self, and we always, even in my novels, even if I'm writing through a character, there is always the self. It's always yourself in one form or another. In the novels, people always say this. People always say, "Is that me? Is that character based on me?" It's not likely people always ask those questions. People you barely know will go, "Is that character based on me?" I take it as flattery. Honestly, there's a bit of yourself in every character, and I feel like there's a bit of yourself in every poem, even if you're writing a poem about. Well, in my case, I'll give you an example. It's probably easier. So the book that I've just finished writing, it's in manuscript form. It's with a publisher, fingers crossed. But that book is about my great-grandmother. So it is very much a book that began, it had its genesis in me doing research to find who she was and the experiences that were quite traumatic that she had as she left the Pale of Settlement in Russia, Poland, this area that kept changing, and she went to New York. And I did a lot of exploration on that, and she was part of a very big diaspora from Eastern Europe into the US. And so as I was looking into that and I was exploring that and working through who she was and how she might have felt, of course, I can only find so much information. I really can only find that much information. And so I really had to invent other aspects of her life, from little bits that I knew, things my grandmother told me, things that, other people told me, things that were written down. But a lot of it was also inventing. And whatever I wrote about her, I was also writing about myself. And so we always look within when we're trying to find empathy, when we're trying to create, when we're trying to explore. At the same time, on the other side of the coin, there is a craft involved when you write something. So there's always this sense of taking what may be very personal and very individual to you, and in that crafting process, in the process of writing and in the process of developing that, and it could be, just some discomfort, some difficult emotion that you experience that's the genesis of that piece of work, let's say it's a poem. In that crafting process, you are actually slowly working that material such that it's not really about you solely anymore. It becomes much more universal. You're exploring the notions and the concepts and the contexts. And so I feel like in the crafting process, it's actually becoming bigger than you, different from you, universal. So, I might start, again, I'm sorry, I'm being long-winded here, but I'll give you an example because I think that helps. I might start with experiencing a sense of missing my mother, who died about 6 years ago. And
Sorry, I'm sorry to
it's a big cataclysmic event in one's life. But also, one of the things you find when you lose a parent is that there is a kind of network of people who have also lost parents. So you are now bonded to those people. And there is a kind of transformative beauty in sharing that very particular pain with others. And so then as you're working through that emotion or that sensation of loss, it becomes less poison and more transformative in the working of it. So it's not so much my personal pain now, but what does it mean? How is she still with me? How is who she was changing all the time for me? And in some ways still alive as I explore the nature of who this person was and her relationship to me. It becomes less about me and becomes more about loss, about trauma, about finding somebody, about transforming, about, what survives our lives, what it means to be human. So all of these things become part of that crafting process, and it becomes less and less personal and more universal.
Yes. Thank you so much. But I'm so sorry to learn about the loss of your mother lately. Uh, I would love to listen to the lines in which you pour all your emotions, the genesis which happened in you regarding your great grandmother, the search for the roots of your great grandmother. So, could you please read out a few lines from that book?
Yes, I have the book here. I can read you one. Would you like me to just pick a poem from that?
Please, why not?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. All right. I will pick a poem for you. Let me pick this one. Just give me. Sorry, I will read. Okay, I'm going to read you a poem called Empire Erased. And this poem is situated in her arrival to Ellis Island on the boat. She was 14 at the time. She arrived on Ellis Island. She was alone. She was part of. There were many people who she arrived with from the same location. It was the biggest diaspora in the U.S., I believe. Empire Erased. It was over in an hour. 1,000 people in an hour. Who dared count the weary passengers disembarking in cramped steerage, wishing deck, lips cracked from sea salt, bribes, promises, as many illicit exchanges as there were people, as there were dreams. Not so much of something better, but of safety. Someone has to survive to pass on the story. They kept moving, checkpoint to checkpoint, fingers probing hair, no lice, clothing, old, stiff, cough, lean forward, raise arms, keep going. An empire was so easily erased, just like that. She would never go back. There were people left behind, of course, in the ghettos of her youth, the shtetls writing names in the air with a finger. She might have sent them a handful of prepaid tickets if the streets really were paved with gold. Words were cobblestones beneath her feet. 21 questions in a language she didn't speak. Name, age, sex, nationality, health, how much money was in her pocket. Was she dangerous? At 5 foot tall with arms like matchsticks, hooded eyes concealing more pain than a malnourished body should be able to hold. How do you answer? She tried and failed to forget her mother's wet eyes, her father's hastily gathered bag of coins, sisters, cousins, uncles. Of course, they existed somewhere, but who knows what happened to them? Their sacrifices, their losses. They're gone. Were they ever there? Keep up the pace. She tried to speak, but words didn't fit her mouth. There were no papers, only a brown tag pinned to the shoulder, containing a number like a price you might put on cattle. She wasn't for sale. Her number wasn't up this time.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
The emotions, really, so gravid with emotions. And the way you read it was fantastic.
Thank you.
Really, I'm carried away. No, I'm going to the next question. That is, why do you title the book as Unreliable Narratives? Do you think that the narrative is unreliable words and phrases, or they are not very much true to your emotions, or the narrative is simply a narrative which cannot be relied on very much? So why did you keep the title Unreliable Narratives? Each poem of that volume is really beautiful, I'm telling you, often. So if
Thank you so much. That is an excellent question. And I'll give you another one of my long rambling and non-answers. For one thing, and I have a book here, so I'll hold it up. I'll hold it up for my publisher's sake.
yeah.
For one thing, the title is a little bit of a joke because they're not narratives at all, of course, they're poems. So they're not stories so much as poetry. So that was just a little bit of a joke that a poem is an unreliable narrative in and of itself. Kind of wry joke, not a laugh out loud joke. But secondly, I do feel like there is a kind of, this is something Maria Tamarkin, the novelist Maria Tamarkin, she's not actually a novelist, she's a non-fiction writer, but she is magnificent, and interviewed her from this very chair that I'm sitting in right now. I interviewed her some time ago, and she told me that the narrative was a violence. Something to a narrative form was a kind of violence. And I thought about that, and I felt there is some incredible truth in this idea that to actually, it's not a brutal violence, but to take all of the individual emotional experiences that one has, or to take all of these bits and pieces that make up a life, and to construct them into a story. There is a kind of you are doing that in a forceful way. You are actually you're making something that is not narrative into a narrative, if that makes sense. Our lives don't really work in narrative sense. So to construct a narrative is in itself, I guess, a form of it's a form of fabrication. Let's put it that way.
Exactly.
And so I feel in some ways, and this is the same for any kind of memoir, including the sort of memoir that I'm writing about my great-grandmother. And that is that there is always a choice that you make about what to include and what not to include, and how you construct the timeline and how you fabricate the story. And so, is it reliable? Is it unreliable? I think there's always a degree of unreliability to it. And I think that is part of what I was playing with in the book as well, because a lot of the pieces in that book, in Unreliable Narrative, they had their genesis in me trying to write some memoir. So I was working on a memoir. I was playing around with a memoir. And I found more and more that the construction of the story of what happened was not reliable to me. I turned them into poetry, which felt much more true to what I was trying to say, because I could then allow for all the ambiguity of not only what happened and what didn't happen, but all the different perceptions that make up something that happens. Because you're only coming in with yours. There are always a lot of other stories. There are many narratives clashing with one another, and poetry handles that kind of that variety, those differing realities very well.
That's
I hope
true.
I've answered. question.
Yeah, of course. Somebody must be there to tell the story, as you told us. Now, could you please read one or two poems from that Unreliable Narratives, that volume?
I'd be happy to. Ketaki, is there something that you were particularly taken with, or would you like me to choose?
Please, why not? You take your time to choose and read out.
Okay, I'll choose something. Let's see. All right. I'll read another of these exile type poems.
Okay. Okay.
This is called Out of Exile.
I see. Read out.
I don't always write about exile.
No. Please.
My country expelled me. I was too hungry, too sloppy, words garbled at the border. It wasn't enough to kneel, beg, climb the ladder, promise next time, this time, the last time. I left of my own accord, traveling light, all baggage in my head. I thought it would be easy to go home later, when the water wasn't so fast, when I'd learned to chew my food, when the air was less polluted with desire. I didn't believe in time, didn't know space and time were twisted, so that when I asked you to take me back in, downgraded by 10,000 compromises, the fuzziness of my brain interrupted by the noise in the street, by digression, there would be no direction, breadcrumbs gone. I ask only this, a scratchy voice out of exile. But you remember some small thing, frying onions, drinking coffee, our walk through the park on a cold day, noses red and running, as we talked and talked, and it felt like we could never be lost.
Beautiful.
Yes.
And if you don't mind, one poem from High Wired Step. A
Okay.
request.
Yes.
Not one poem, two poems. Back
Two
to
poems.
back.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about I read the last two poems in the book?
Okay.
All right. Actually, they're not the last two, but I will read you the last one last,
Okay.
and I will
Please.
read you. All right. I'll read you one, since I mentioned her, I'll read one that I wrote for my mother. And then I'll read you the last poem in the book. The one I wrote for my mother is called Breaking Sticks with My Ghost. The sun, the sky, ectoplasm, an unlikely mix. She whispers in my ear, you never believed. And yet, the signal to noise ratio, co-channel interference is high today. Light bends, buzzes. It's Friday the 13th. She inhabits the open space boldly, trying to remember muscle strain, splinters, a side stitch, all those lovely sensations. Her laugh is the wind, the slow-growing headache that comes from bending and lifting and bending in the heat. Her sense of humor undiminished with time or incorporality. She knows me well, drops a stick at my feet from the air with a greater thud than the size or density would warrant. Laughs again, more vibration than sound. Taps me benignly on the shoulder to let me know. Slips off.
Beautiful.
And the last,
another poem, yeah. Another poem, please. Another poem.
okay, the last poem in the book,
Please.
is called Bird Strike. And I say this every time I read this poem, but I'll say it again. I wrote this poem. My daughter My daughter asked me if I could write a poem. She asked me if I could end the next book that I was writing with the word goose. And I promised her that I would do it, and I did it.
Oh,
So
this is your promise. Okay, fine. That's
yes.
good.
So the last word in this book is goose, and that is because I promised my daughter I would do it.
Do it. Yeah.
Bird strike. This could be any window, any airplane, murky plexiglass. Water runs down the inside. Outside in the darkening sky, clouds, cirrocumulus, or maybe something else ahead of a frontal system observed on the edge of a wing. It's not so much a window as a memory. The protective glass, aerosol, liquid droplets, saturation spreading through the cabinet. On the way to where you aren't, though I don't know that yet, cut off from contact in this otherworldly space of canned air and scratchy announcements. This is not the scene, leaning a fevered head against the open shade, cold, uneasy, knowing something is following out there, a premonition undimmed by the smell of food congealing in a tray before me. How many times have I woken here in this moment, feeling the cut, touching the breather hole, the bleed hole, the scratch pain, no felt of frost under my outstretched finger, containing the pressure between cabin and sky. Because you've never left this space, forever migrant, you know there's something more beyond the precipitation, bird strike, blood and debris, the last song of a deviant goose.
Beautiful. Last song of Deviant Cruise. Really. Thank you, Maggie, for answering my questions. Now I pass the microphone on to Dr. Indrajit Bose, who will be asking you a few questions. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for all your kind words and your attention and all your reviews as well. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. Indrajit Bose.
Yes, thank you, Ketaki. No, I do not want to ask too many questions, but I will ask one or two. So, one question, of course, first of all, I would like to say that I enjoyed all your readings and the stories of migrancy and exile. Because, of course, I did not know all this about your background, but I did guess a little bit of it from reading the two volumes of your poems that I have read, that is High Wire Step and Undeniable Narratives. Now, the question that I wanted to ask was about, your use of words. You say that there are so many things I need to say, but words aren't helpful in this stark white space. Okay, in High Wire Step, I think. And also, you write that you are an exile from language. Okay, in Great People, the poem Great
Yeah.
People. Okay, and also in Undeniable Narratives, in Yellow and Crimson, you say that this is the point where words fail. Okay, so there's a kind of anxiety about being able to express oneself in words, and yet we know that for all writers, words are all they have. Yes, and there is a kind of unburdening, creative unburdening, which takes place through the words in which we express ourselves. So there is a kind of tension, isn't it, between words being inadequate enough to express your innermost thoughts, and words being the only medium that we have to express. So, how do you regard this coalescence, okay, or this tension? This is what I wanted to ask.
Yeah, yes, that's a wonderful question. And I honestly, I don't really, I don't have an easy answer for it, other than to say that is definitely a tension that I think a lot of writers have. Words are our medium, and words have always been my medium. They're the medium I feel most comfortable with. I'm, very much, I very much like to work with words. That's my creative space. And yet, and I guess this is why poetry is something that appeals to me, is that it's not just the words when you're writing a poem that you're working with. They're not actually your only medium. There's also the rhythm and the space
Yes.
and the sonic elements of the words. There's the way it all looks on the page, which has a visual element. There's the white space and the stanza and the line break and
That's right.
and again things like sound. So if I can create meaning through sibilance, through using lots of S words, or through repetition, or there's all sorts of things that I can do that are not strictly about the semantics or the meanings of my words, but about what I'm trying to evoke. And I always want to do more. There's always that
That's
tension.
right.
I
That's right.
always want to go that little step further, and I think all writers do. It's just never enough. There's always a
No.
kind of inherent. Maybe this goes back to that unreliable narrative question as well. There's always something we're not quite getting at, or there's
Yeah,
something we're
that's right.
trying to get at. And what's exciting to me and what I love is that sometimes where that meaning sits is not necessarily in my work, but in the space between the reader and the work. So where that meaning is created, or where that connection happens, is in when you read it, and when you bring that whole parcel of your own personal experiences
That's right.
into your reading, and we're meeting somewhere. We're connecting in this some no space,
Yes.
but somehow there is this connection happening, and that is in itself nonverbal, and yet it is stimulated by the words. And so that paradox just exists, and I love that paradox, and I love playing with that paradox. And
Right.
I also experience anxiety with that paradox. So it's a great question, and I think it's fodder for many poets.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Thank you. So, words are walnut shells darkening with age, composting into new forms of peat, you write in another Kaddish. Okay. So they are taking new shapes, new forms, morphing into many different kind of experiences, and that is what you give us in your poetry. So it's a delight to read, of course. And the other question that I wanted to ask was regarding the formal experiments, the craftsmanship in the poetry, because there are many different verse forms, different kinds of you know experiments that you have done, as I can see, okay, from the two volumes that I have read. So, do you think that one needs to go on with this experimentation all the time, or is it that it depends on what your feeling is at that particular time? I mean, what is it that you feel actually about the experimentation?
Uh, Look, I do like to play with different, experimental types, different structures, different forms. It may be stimulated by some kind of, stimulus, or a call out, or a request for writing in a certain form. I do like to take on challenges. So it may be that there is a challenge that I have agreed to take on in writing in a very particular form or with a constraint. Um, but I'm not a hugely experimental writer. I mean, I don't feel like my work is as experimental as some. I'm not like Gertrude Stein, for example, or Michael Farrell, or Joanne Burns, who are all notable experimentalists. I love all those three writers. I like their work, and I am inspired by that
That's right.
work. But at the same time, I feel like my work is not that experimental. It's really quite. It tends to be sensical. If that's clear. Like I tend to be working. I feel like I'm saying something consistent in each of my poems that is able to be found and understood. So, having said that, sometimes I will I participated in a lot of groups. I participated in a lot of writing groups, and
Mhm.
one of the writing groups that I participated in, one of the stimuluses for us was to pick another person's poem and write a poem based on that other person's poem. So, to be stimulated. And my, the editor for Highwire Step, Kit Kellen, who's an amazing editor, he and I often will do that. He'll send me a poem and say, you write a poem now in response to this, and I'll send him one back, and he'll write a poem in response. And I do find that sometimes when I do that, it takes me a little bit out of myself, which is great, and encourages me to think about the form they've used and to write my work in response to that form. And sometimes my work will take on a little bit of a different structure as a result of doing that. But I'm open to whatever form the muse takes. Anything that stimulates a poem is worthwhile for me, and I do try to keep myself open to different
Right.
structures, different forms. And it may
Right.
be that I'm trying to say something that specifically requires a constraint or
Mhm.
a structural form that is more experimental than I would usually use. And if that's the case, then I'll do that.
Right. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we will not plague you with more questions.
No, why not? Indrajit, please ask a few more questions. I'll be happy to
Okay, you
No.
can read another
Uh,
ask
poem if you'd like.
Magdalena.
yes, please do so. You can
Yeah.
choose any poem that you like.
Well,
Yes,
I think you
please.
mentioned another Kaddish, so I can read that one if you like.
Yes, yes, that was a very moving poem. Another Kaddish.
I'm just finding it. Actually, I think that was an unreliable narrative, wasn't it?
Yes, that's an unreliable narrative.
Yes. Okay, I've got it. All right. Another Kaddish.
Okay.
Now that we have time tucked into birthday streamers, the silence isn't unbearable. I can see how dearly you would like to fill it. I'd rather hold. In the gap between breaths, you told me I'd changed. Once soft, now hard. Or maybe once tough, now soft. Words are walnut shells darkening with age, composting into new forms of peat. Constraints are only borders, able to be crossed, even taking into account all the time that has passed. That you no longer hear my constant Kaddish whispered into the air and sleep murmurings. We remain strangers to one another, to ourselves, even to this moment, unfolding black on white, as ink scarring the page with longing and acceptance. Absence is part of the ritual. Language of fourth dimension, numinous, sweet, sour as exile in this neutral territory. You reach for me and find yourself.
Beautiful.
And I think I've
Absence is
said
part of
exile in
it.
every poem, haven't I?
Yes, yes, that's right.
Really.
And you have also written that I'll always be in transit. So
Yeah.
that's another one of your poems.
Yes,
So,
maybe not at the moment because I am in fact down,
mm,
but
yes, that's right.
mentally.
That's true.
Yes. Many writers do have that feeling all the time. So I think it's been a great session and a great morning for us. Is it also morning in Australia for you right now?
It's
No,
2:30,
2 p.m.
Okay,
2:30.
past two,
it's afternoon. Afternoon in
early
Australia.
afternoon. Yes,
Right, right.
yeah.
So I think it's been a great session with Magdalena Ball and with Ketaki over here. And we hope that the words have changed into stones or sticks, but not broken bones, as you write in another of your poems. And that our words will not be ephemeral, but they will survive and continue to inspire and to give joy to many readers, countless readers in the days to come. So, thank you, Magdalena Ball, for joining us for this session on the Speaking Muse from myself and Ketaki, and it was great having you. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Magdalena. It was really nice to talk to you and listen to you reading. It was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you, Dr. Bose.